The story began at my son's birthday party. When he introduced his stepfather as his actual father and me as his mother's ex-husband, I just put on a smile and left without a word. That same week, his bank loan was rejected, and a planned trip to Europe was canceled. My ex-wife, Sarah, later appeared at my doorstep, crying and begging for my help. All of these dramatic events were set in motion by her tearful arrival. I walked through Sarah's front door holding a wrapped present, anticipating the typical uncomfortable but polite birthday get-together. The living room was filled with the sound of people talking until Peter noticed me from across the room. He pointed at me and announced loudly that I was his mother's ex-husband, then gestured for me to sit in an empty chair close to the kitchen. All the background noise instantly stopped. A fork made a sharp, echoing sound as it hit a plate. Even the candle on his birthday cake seemed to waver in the sudden quiet. I wore the same kind of smile I had perfected over 30 years of marriage and 5 years of divorce. I wished Peter a happy birthday. Emily, my daughter, looked completely embarrassed. As I sat down, she leaned in to tell me how sorry she was, saying she had no idea what had gotten into her brother. I told her it was okay, but I had already noticed the shiny car keys on the coffee table. The pristine keychain told me it was a BMW. Mark, who had been Sarah's husband for 3 years, toasted Peter, the son I'd always wanted but never truly had. Peter beamed, clinking his glass with his stepfather's. He thanked Mark, calling him Dad, and telling him he was grateful for everything. That word hit me with the force of a physical blow. I remembered purchasing Peter's first bicycle when he was 7. I had worked double shifts at the factory for 2 months just to buy it for him. Back then, his face had lit up with the exact same expression. Emily quietly defended me, pointing out that I had paid for his college. Peter dismissed this by saying that it was different, that it was simply what I was supposed to do. I thought about what that meant. It had meant paying for 4 years of his tuition, his apartment rent, and his car insurance until he was 28. It had also meant paying for his wedding, a marriage that only lasted 8 months. Sarah then appeared next to Mark, sliding her arm around his waist. She said that Mark had given Peter something far more valuable than money, a real father figure. The birthday cake remained untouched between us, its 35 candles burning down. As I watched the wax drip onto the frosting, a cold feeling began to settle in my chest. Peter suddenly asked me if I remembered buying him that bike. A small sense of hope sparked inside of me. I remembered his first bike and how he had ridden it around the block a dozen times that day. He responded by saying that Mark had just given him something far better, jangling the new BMW keys. It was a brand new car, not some old piece of junk, he pointed out. My son was right, the bike had been used. I had spent weeks trying to find one in good condition that I could afford. He had loved it back then, or at least I thought he had. I carefully placed my fork down, the metal feeling cold against my fingers. The party went on around me with forced laughter, uneasy chatter, and the scraping of chairs against the floor. But something within me had hardened, becoming sharp and unforgiving. Peter continued to talk about the new car, Mark's generosity, and how good it was to finally have a real father who understood him. Each word he spoke chipped away at something that had been building for years. I finally looked at my son, truly seeing him. He was 35 years old, had been unemployed 3 times that year, was living on handouts, and was calling it love. I saw exactly the man I had created. The candles had burned down to nothing. Guests began checking their phones, ready to depart. Emily kept glancing over at me with worried eyes. I felt the familiar impulse to smooth things over, to make excuses, to take the high road. But for the first time in decades, I let that feeling just pass through me. The evening continued like a slow-motion disaster. Peter told one story after another about Mark's wisdom, his business success, and his qualities as a father, all while looking in my direction. He said Mark had taught him how to negotiate and stand up for himself, not just roll over when people tried to take advantage. Sarah murmured how wonderful that was as she refilled Mark's wine glass. I remembered teaching Peter to ride his bike, running beside him until my lungs burned, holding the seat steady until he found his balance, and letting go only when he was ready. Peter asked why I had never gotten him something like the new car, saying I had the money but chose not to spend it. The accusation was an insult. For most of his childhood, I had worked 2 jobs. I had skipped 15 years of vacations to pay for his soccer camps, music lessons, and college application fees. But Mark could write 1 check and be the hero. Emily stood up for me, saying that I had worked very hard for everything I gave him. Peter replied that there was a difference between working hard and actually caring. He said that Mark cared enough to truly help, not just to throw money at problems. I gripped my fork, the metal warming in my hand. I quietly told Peter that he was being unfair. He just laughed. He claimed that I had missed half of his games because I was working. He said that I had missed his graduation because I was sick with the flu, and he asked me when I had ever put him first. I remembered selling my motorcycle to pay for his senior trip, taking out a second mortgage for his wedding, and co-signing his apartment lease after his second bankruptcy. I didn't say any of that. Instead, I just watched him lean back in his chair, satisfied with his performance, and a final feeling of understanding settled over me. The other guests had gone quiet again. Someone coughed, and I could hear a clock ticking in the kitchen. I slowly got up, folding my napkin. I told Peter that he was absolutely right, and his smug expression wavered a bit. He seemed to ask what I meant. I replied that I should have taught him to be more grateful and shown him that actions had consequences. I then looked around the room, meeting everyone's gaze. Sarah said sharply that this was my mistake and that I shouldn't be making a scene. I explained that I wasn't making anything. I was simply leaving. I reached for my jacket. Emily jumped up and told me to wait. I told her it was fine and kissed her cheek. I added that I hoped her brother enjoyed his gift. Peter, now frowning, asked what I meant by that. I smiled at him, the same smile I had given him when he was 7 and had tried to hide his broken lamp from me. I told him happy birthday and walked toward the door. I could hear the confused murmuring of voices behind me, and Emily followed me out onto the porch. She said that I couldn't just leave like that. I turned to face her and said that actually, I could. I had let this kind of behavior go on for too long, and her brother thought I was just some pushover he could use and discard. I told her that it was time to show him what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. Her eyes widened, and she asked what I was going to do. I assured her it would be nothing dramatic. I would just stop being so helpful. I squeezed her shoulder and told her not to worry, that she would understand soon enough. I then walked down the driveway past Mark's pristine sedan and Peter's old Honda, the car I had helped him buy 2 years earlier when his credit was ruined. The April evening was crisp and full of possibilities. Behind me, the porch light flickered on. Emily was still standing there, watching me go. For the first time in many years, I felt completely clear about what was going to happen next. The cool evening air hit my face as I stepped out into the night. Every footstep on the sidewalk echoed the thought that after 35 years of giving, this was all I had to show for it. I shoved my hands deeper into my jacket pockets. The walk home felt like a journey through all my past memories. Every crack in the sidewalk seemed to remind me of another time I had gone out of my way for Peter. I passed the crack by the Miller's house and remembered Peter's 16th birthday, when he had insisted on getting a car instead of the used truck I had found for him. He had said that I was so cheap, and asked why I couldn't get him something nice for once. I had worked 3 extra shifts that month just to get him a better gift. My shoes crunched over fallen leaves as I passed the corner store, where the buzzing neon signs cast a harsh blue light over everything. I saw a car go by with a father and his teenage son inside, laughing at something on the radio, and the sight sent a twist of pain through my chest. That was it. I was done. The hill leading to my apartment complex seemed steeper than usual. Each step I took was a reminder of all the times I had gotten myself out of debt to help Peter, like his failed restaurant venture that cost me $15,000, or his business course that went nowhere and cost another $8,000. Then there was his wedding to that girl who left him after maxing out her credit cards, $12,000 for a party that lasted only 5 hours. A street light flickered as I passed under it, and the shadows seemed to dance like all the sleepless nights I had spent worrying about his future while he was sleeping off hangovers in his 20s. I remembered him saying during a bad fight that I never believed in him and that Mark would understand his dreams. Mark had only known Peter for 3 years and bought his affection with a car. Mark had never held Peter's head after his first hangover, had never taught him how to change a tire, and had never sat through a parent-teacher conference trying to explain his slipping grades. After the long walk, I used my key to open my front door. The apartment felt smaller and was filled with the weight of everything I had just admitted to myself. The photos on my mantel looked back at me, showing Peter at different ages, always smiling, always reaching for something that was just out of the frame. In my bedroom, I loosened my tie and sat on the edge of the bed. The digital clock blinked 10:47 p.m. The next day was Friday. Peter would likely sleep until noon and then spend the day showing off his new car to his friends while Mark reveled in the gratitude. But I knew that credit cards had limits and bank accounts had administrators. And after 28 years of marriage and 5 years of divorce, I understood exactly how financial responsibility worked. I pulled off my shoes, and they dropped to the floor with a satisfying thump. Outside, the city settled into its quiet rhythm with distant traffic, the barking of a dog, and the humming of electrical lines. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, I dreamed of bicycle wheels spinning and the sound of my son's laughter from a time when he still needed me to keep him balanced. I woke up shaking. The morning light filtered through the curtains like a spotlight. The trembling from my dream had settled into a steady resolve, solidifying in my chest like cold winter air. I sat up, ran my hands through my hair, and felt the weight of decades lift from my shoulders. Today, Peter would finally learn what accountability looked like. 20 minutes later, I was in my truck, driving toward First National Bank downtown. The radio played an oldies station, but I barely heard it. My mind was already at the bank, signing papers and watching Peter's safety net vanish. The downtown traffic was light for a Friday morning. I pulled into the bank's parking lot and sat for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. Through the windshield, I could see the brick building where I had opened Peter's account 15 years ago during his first emotional breakdown after the divorce. At the time, he was 20 years old and desperate after his girlfriend had cleaned out their joint account. He had said that he just needed something to fall back on until he got back on his feet. It had been 15 years since then, and he was still on his feet, apparently comfortable enough to humiliate the man who had kept him there. Inside the bank, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A young teller with kind eyes looked up as I approached. She greeted me and asked how she could help. I pulled out my wallet and told her that I needed to remove someone from my account. I said his name was Peter and that he had had access for years, but that arrangement had to end. The teller, a young woman, frowned as she clicked through her computer, asking if there was a particular reason for this change. Noting that Peter was an adult who should be able to manage his own money, my words came out calmer than I was feeling. It was simply time for him to learn some responsibility. The paperwork was finished in just 15 minutes. Each time I signed my name, it felt like I was finally closing a door that should have been locked so long ago. The pen moved with a satisfying precision across the forms, completing a process to revoke access, remove authorization, and suspend privileges. The teller explained that the changes would take effect immediately and that he would get a notification within 24 hours. Perfect, I thought. As I walked back to my truck, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in months. The Montana sky, a perfect, endless blue above the buildings, felt full of possibility instead of the usual sense of obligation. I had just reached my driver's door when my phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. My thumb hovered over the screen, a feeling in my gut telling me this was only the beginning. It buzzed again before I could even start the engine, and this time, it was Peter calling. I let it ring twice before I picked up. I said hello, and he immediately demanded to know what I had done. His voice was shrill and desperate, just like when he was 12 and had been caught stealing candy. He told me his card had been declined at a gas station for insufficient funds. I pulled over to the side of the road to focus on the conversation. His voice was becoming more hysterical as he questioned me about having to use his own account. He told me that I couldn't just cut him off like that because he had bills to pay and commitments to meet. I thought about all the times I'd had to solve someone else's problems. I pointed out that he was 35 and that most people his age managed their own money. He immediately turned venomous, saying he knew this was because of the previous night, because he hadn't fawned over me enough at his own birthday party. I remembered a time last year when he had called me from a Reno casino late at night, sobbing about his maxed-out credit cards and a threat of eviction. I had wired him $3,000 and told him it would be the last time, but there had been other instances since. I calmly told him that this wasn't punishment, it was about accountability. He laughed bitterly and told me that if I wanted to talk about accountability, we should talk about all the years I was never around. He accused me of working late, going on business trips, and missing everything that mattered. I thought about all those late nights to pay for his karate lessons, all those business trips to afford his college, and all the social events I had to miss to fund his lifestyle. I told him I was hanging up, and he yelled at me not to dare. He accused me of trying to destroy his life because I had gotten my feelings hurt and said that he would tell everyone what kind of father I truly was, claiming that his mother already knew. My voice, which hadn't felt so authoritative in years, told Peter that he was no longer my responsibility. The silence that followed was immense. Finally, in a whisper, he told me that I would regret this. He said I couldn't humiliate him and get away with it and that I had no idea what was coming. The line went dead. For several minutes, I just sat in my truck, watching people go about their normal Friday routines. A mother pushed a stroller, a businessman checked his phone, and an elderly couple walked hand in hand across the street. None of them had spent the last 35 years enabling someone who perceived kindness as a weakness. I looked at my phone and saw I had 3 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and a text from Emily asking if I was okay. As I was watching, a new message from Sarah's number appeared. It seemed the battle was just getting started. Sarah's message was brief and cold. She told me to fix this right away, accusing me of destroying the family just to be spiteful. Before I could fully take that in, my phone rang, and it was Emily. She asked me what was happening, saying that Peter was posting crazy things on Facebook about me cutting off the family. As I drove home, she read the posts to me. In Peter's version of events, I was a spiteful ex-husband who had cut off his innocent son for having the audacity to love his stepfather. Comments were already coming in from relatives I barely spoke to anymore. Emily's voice was tight with anger as she read on, telling me that he was saying I had never supported him and that I was jealous of Mark's success and was taking it out on him. I thought about the divorce 5 years earlier, when Sarah had wanted half of everything, even my retirement fund. She had claimed that she deserved it after 28 years of sacrifice. I thought about how she had never worked a day while I was pulling double shifts. I told Emily to just let him post whatever he wanted. She insisted that I couldn't just ignore this because our Aunt Carol, Uncle Dave, and even some of my old work friends were commenting. By the time I arrived at my apartment, the posts had multiplied. Peter had shared his version in 3 separate family chat groups, and Sarah had added her own comments about my cruel abandonment and midlife crisis. It was all there, lies mixed with just enough truth to sound believable. I scrolled through the comments, watching my distant relatives choose sides. While some defended me, others completely believed Peter's story. My phone kept buzzing with notifications as the story spread. I saw a comment from Sarah saying that I had always been selfish and that she should have seen this coming years ago. I thought about the word selfish. She was the one who had redecorated our house 3 times while I drove a 15-year-old pickup, who had insisted on private schools that I couldn't afford and vacations that maxed out my credit cards. I put my phone down and walked to my kitchen window. The sun was setting behind the Bear-Tooth Mountains, casting a golden light over everything. I was sure that somewhere out there, Peter was celebrating his successful character assassination, convinced he had me trapped. As I watched the light fade, a reminder popped up on my phone, something I had forgotten in all the drama. My annual fishing trip to Yellowstone. I had booked and paid for it months ago. 2 weeks of solitude in the wilderness, completely off the grid. It was perfect timing for a man who needed to disappear while his family destroyed each other in his absence. I smiled and started packing. A few hours later, while I was sitting at my kitchen table checking my emails, another reminder appeared on my laptop screen. Its bright light cut through the evening gloom like a spotlight on all the promises I had forgotten. It was a confirmation for Peter's Europe trip, with a departure date of May 15th. I had bought him business class tickets for graduation, a stay at a luxury hotel in Rome, and a rental car upgrade he had requested because he found regular cars too cramped. It was a 3-week luxury vacation that had cost me nearly $8,000. I had booked it all 6 months earlier, when he had called me crying about his life falling apart and needing something to look forward to. That same week, I had eaten canned soup for dinner for 4 nights straight to stay within my budget. My cursor hovered over the Manage Booking button. Outside my window, the Bear-Tooth Mountains stretched on endlessly under the darkening sky, their peaks catching the last light like promises that were actually kept. I clicked the button. The airline's website opened with crisp efficiency, displaying flight details, hotel reservations, and car rental confirmations. It was all paid for, and all of it was refundable with only a small penalty. It was a small price for a large lesson. I clicked Cancel Entire Booking, and the system asked me if I was sure. Was I sure? I thought back to Peter's face when he had called Mark his real father, his dismissive gesture toward the empty chair, and the way Sarah had smiled approvingly when he had humiliated me. I was sure. I tapped Confirm Cancellation with the same authority I once used to sign his report cards, approve his emergency room visits, and co-sign his apartment leases. But this time I was the one making the demands. The screen flickered, showing processing, then cancellation complete. The refund amount was a little over $7,000. Nearly $8,000 would be returning to my account within 5 business days. Money that would not be funding his Roman vacation while he posted online about my cruelty. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something shift in my chest, like tectonic plates finding a new alignment. The mountains outside were completely dark, but the light in my kitchen made everything perfectly clear. My phone buzzed with a new text notification from an unknown number. For the first time in 35 years, I was looking forward to hearing what my son had to say. It didn't take long for my phone to light up with a call. Before I even finished saying hello, his voice came through the phone, already thunderous. His words were strangled and desperate, asking what I had done and saying his Europe trip was canceled and that the airline said I had done it. I put the phone on speaker and went back to my laptop screen. I confirmed that what he was saying was correct. He insisted that I couldn't do that, because they were his tickets and his vacation that he had been planning for months. I told him that I had paid for them, and they were in my name, so I had the right to cancel them. He started breathing heavily, and there was a long pause. Then his voice cracked into something I hadn't heard since he was a child. He begged me, saying that the trip meant everything to him and was the only good thing he had at the moment. I thought about his words. The only good thing. Not his new car. Not his loving stepfather. Not his supportive mother. Just the vacation I had funded while he had called me his mother's ex-husband. I quietly told him to call Mark and ask his real father to rebook it. The silence that followed was tight, like a pulled wire. His voice faltered as he tried to respond. He started to say that Mark couldn't, then stopped himself and said that maybe he had said some things the night before that came out wrong. I told him to just call Mark. After another pause, his fury returned, sharp and brittle. He said that he would and that Mark would help him because he actually cared about his happiness. Then the line went quiet, and I could hear the electronic beeps of him dialing through the speaker. It was like a countdown. My kitchen clock ticked steadily, and outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and then fell silent. I heard him on the phone, his voice now different and smaller as he greeted Mark. He said his name and explained that there was a problem with his Europe trip. I couldn't hear Mark's side of the conversation, but I could follow it through Peter's words. His voice started confidently, explaining the situation and asking for help. Then it became pleading as he pointed out that it was only $8,000 and that Mark had bought him a car worth twice that. There was a pause, and then he asked Mark if he was still there, his voice filled with desperation. The call lasted 3 minutes and 17 seconds, just long enough for a stepfather's love to reveal exactly what it was worth when an actual sacrifice was required. Peter's sharp and uneven breathing was audible through the speaker. He quietly told me that Mark had said no and that he thought $8,000 was too much for a vacation. He repeated the words as if he were learning a new language. He asked me how that could be true because Mark had said he loved him and that he was the son he had never had. Peter's voice began to break apart, and he said that Mark had bought him a car. I asked him if he had checked the financing details, then gently suggested that he call the dealership and ask who was actually making the payments. I could almost hear his world being remade as brick after brick of illusion crumbled away. But there was still more to learn. Morning light was filtering through my kitchen window when my doorbell rang, the sound sharp and demanding. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I wasn't surprised to see Sarah standing on my doorstep. Her mascara was streaked down her cheeks like war paint. Her voice cracked, and she told me that I had to fix this, even before she had fully entered my home. She said that Peter was having a breakdown and had sold his car the day before. I stepped aside to let her in, noticing how she clutched a crumpled tissue like a lifeline. I asked her if he had really sold the car. She followed me into the living room, her heels clicking frantically on my hardwood floor. She said that things had gone too far, and he was even talking about getting a job. Her horror was almost amusing. I sat down across from her and watched the tears well up in her eyes. The same tears that had worked so well during our marriage whenever she had wanted something I couldn't afford. I asked her why that was a problem, and her hands fluttered helplessly as she explained that he was 35 years old and shouldn't have to start all over again like some college graduate. Sarah told me how sensitive Peter was and how hard change was for him. I knew what she meant. She had used the same word every time he had failed at a job. He was always sensitive, never accountable. I thought about the divorce papers, how she had demanded half of my retirement fund, claiming she had sacrificed her career for the family, a career she had never started. I remembered how those sacrifices had consisted mostly of spending my paychecks on redecorating and weekend trips. She desperately continued, telling me that Peter had called Mark again the night before, begging him to reconsider the Europe trip, but that Mark had hung up on him. She said that she had chosen Mark for security and stability, but that he had told Peter that an $8,000 vacation was excessive and that Peter needed to learn limits. She looked at me with genuine confusion, asking if I could imagine such a thing. I could imagine many things. Mark writing one impressive check to win a son's loyalty, Mark drawing the line when real money was involved, and Mark discovering what I had known for decades, that Peter's gratitude had a very short shelf life. Sarah then said that I had created the mess and that I could uncreate it. She told me to just give him the trip back and put him on my account again so that everything could go back to normal. 35 years of normal had led us to this moment, with my ex-wife crying in my living room because her son might actually have to work for a living. I reached for my wallet on the side table, pulled out a $20 bill, and placed it between us. I told her that was all I was giving anyone in this family ever again. Her mouth dropped open, and I explained that it was bus fare in case Peter needed to get to a job interview. I stood up and walked to the door, holding it open for her. The April breeze carried the scent of blooming lilacs, a sign of spring finally arriving in Billings, like hope taking root after a long winter. Sarah stared at the 20 on the table as if it might transform into something bigger. When it didn't, she snatched it up and stuffed it into her purse with what she probably believed was wounded dignity. She then told me that I would regret this, just as Peter had. She said I would regret it when he was homeless and when he realized his father had abandoned him. I gently corrected her, saying, his stepfather, the man he had chosen. The door closed behind her with a satisfying click, leaving my house quiet and clean again. Days blurred into a quiet routine until Emily's evening call on Tuesday. Her voice was filled with a note of amazement I had not heard in years. She told me I wouldn't believe it, but Peter had gotten a job at a call center downtown, doing customer service. She sounded giddy, saying it was an entry-level position and that he would be starting Monday at 8:30 in the morning. I thought about Peter, who hadn't seen 8:30 in the morning since high school graduation, and who had once told me that traditional employment was soul-crushing and beneath his entrepreneurial spirit. Emily continued, telling me that he had also sold the BMW, and that he had gotten enough money to cover 3 months' rent on a studio apartment. Nothing fancy, just a place of his own. I thought about the gleaming car keys he had dangled so proudly at his birthday party, the symbol of Mark's superior fatherhood, now converted into practical necessities like rent and groceries. I asked how Sarah was handling it, and Emily's laugh held a bitter edge. She said that Sarah was furious, insisting that it was just a temporary setback and that Mark would come through eventually, but that Peter was no longer taking her calls. The April evening settled around my apartment like a comfortable blanket. Through my window, I could see my neighbors tending their gardens, preparing for another Montana growing season. I watched life continue its patient cycles of planting and harvesting. I asked Emily if he was still angry, and she said that was the strange part. He sounded different, tired but not angry. She told me that he had asked for my address yesterday, and my coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. She said that she thought he wanted to talk face to face, and her voice softened. She told me that she didn't know what I had done, but that she thought it had worked. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen as darkness fell over Billings. Somewhere across town, my 35-year-old son was probably figuring out what to wear to his first real job, setting an alarm clock for the first time in years, and learning the weight of real responsibility. A quiet, better satisfaction settled in my chest, not the bitter triumph I had expected. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This time, when I opened it, the message was only 2 words: "Thank you." I smiled and began planning what I would say when he knocked on my door. Days of contemplation slipped by until a familiar figure approached my front steps on a quiet Saturday morning. Through the window, I watched Peter pause at my mailbox, gathering courage like armor before a battle. He looked different, smaller somehow, even though he had actually lost weight. His hair was shorter and more practical. The casual arrogance I had grown accustomed to was gone, replaced by something that looked like humility. The knock came softly, tentatively, nothing like the demanding presence he had carried at his birthday party. I opened the door, and his voice cracked slightly as he greeted me, asking if he could come inside. I stepped aside without a word. He entered slowly, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets and his eyes fixed on my hardwood floor, as if it held the answers to questions he was just beginning to ask. I offered him coffee, and he said that would be nice. We sat at my kitchen table, steam rising between us like incense in a church. He wrapped his fingers around the mug as if drawing warmth from more than just the ceramic. He started to say something, then stopped and started again, telling me he owed me a real apology. He said that what he had said at his party, calling me his mother's ex-husband and treating me like a stranger, had been cruel and wrong. The words hung in the air between us. Outside, a cardinal called to its mate from the oak tree I had planted when Peter was 7. The same tree he had helped me water every day that first summer, so proud to be trusted with a grown-up responsibility. He continued, meeting my eyes for the first time, saying that the job was hard, his feet hurt every night, and he had never been so tired in his life. But he smiled shakily, saying that he had earned every dollar of that paycheck and had forgotten what that felt like. He added that his apartment was tiny, just a closet with a hot plate, but that it was his, and pride flickered in his voice, an emotion I had not heard from him in decades. He told me that he had paid the security deposit, first month's rent, and last month's rent all by himself. I remembered the last apartment I had helped him secure, how he had complained about the carpet color, the size of the closets, and the distance from downtown, and how he had moved out 3 months later when someone had offered him a better deal that fell through. He quietly told me that Mark would not return his calls, and that his mother kept telling him this was all temporary and that he should wait for Mark to come around, but that he didn't think he wanted Mark to come around anymore. I asked him why, and he stared into his coffee like it might reveal secrets. He said it was because when he had really needed help and was desperate and scared, Mark had disappeared. He then said that I had taught him that actions mattered more than words and that Mark's actions had shown him exactly who he could count on. I asked him who he could count on, and he responded, "Myself." The word came out strong and certain. He said that, for the first time in his life, he knew he could count on himself. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the cardinal pair build their nest, new beginnings taking shape one careful twig at a time. Peter finally said that he didn't expect me to forgive him right away and that he knew he had a lot to prove, but that he wanted me to know he was not the same person who had humiliated me at that party. I reached across the table and squeezed his shoulder. His work shirt was wrinkled but clean, earned through honest labor. I told him he had already proved it by showing up here, and that it had taken real courage. He smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from him since he was a child. With that chapter mended, Weeks unfolded in a fresh rhythm. My mornings began with walks through Riverfront Park, greeting neighbors who had become friends over the years, like Mrs. Patterson and Joe from the hardware store. For the first time in decades, I felt completely free. Emily observed that I looked different, lighter somehow. During our weekly lunch at a downtown cafe, I sipped my coffee and watched the Saturday crowd outside. Families with strollers, teenagers sharing earbuds, and elderly couples holding hands. I admitted that I did feel different, like I had been carrying someone else's luggage for 35 years and had finally put it down. She laughed, a sound filled with genuine joy. She told me that Peter was doing well, that he had been promoted to team leader at the call center, and that he was getting a small raise. I told her that was good for him. She said that he sometimes asked about me and wondered if I was proud of him. I told her to tell him that I was, and I meant it. The young man who had shown up at my door bore little resemblance to the entitled stranger who had humiliated me at his birthday party. Work had given him a purpose, and independence had given him dignity. That afternoon, I stopped by a travel agency downtown, something I had not done for myself in years. The walls were covered with postcards from exotic locations, promises of adventures I had always postponed for someone else's needs. Sarah, the agent who had helped me book Peter's canceled Europe vacation, asked if I was planning a trip. I told her that maybe I would go to Alaska, as I had always wanted to see the northern lights. She said it was a wonderful choice and asked when I would like to go. I told her that I could go whenever I wanted, and the words tasted like freedom. I explained that I was retired and that my children were grown and that my time was my own. Driving home with the booking information in my passenger seat, I took the long route through the hills overlooking Billings. The city spread below me like a patchwork quilt, with each neighborhood telling its own story of struggle and triumph, loss and renewal. My phone buzzed with a text from Peter. It said, "Thank you for teaching me what a real father does. Love you, Dad." I pulled over at the scenic overlook and stepped out of my truck. The Bear-Tooth Mountains stretched endlessly toward the horizon, their peaks catching the late afternoon sun like promises waiting to be kept. Somewhere up there, mountain goats navigated impossible cliffs, eagles soared on thermals, and wildflowers bloomed in meadows no human eye would ever see. The world was vast and full of possibilities I had never given myself permission to explore. But that was then. A breeze carried hints of pine and possibility, whispering of paths untaken and adventures yet to come. I breathed deeply, tasting freedom on the Montana air. In the distance, a train whistled, heading somewhere I had never been, carrying stories I had never heard, and promising destinations I could now choose for myself. I smiled and got back into my truck, already planning my next journey.